Welcome to another episode of Consumer Engagement in an Omnichannel World. Our co-hosts, Sri Rajagopalan and Peter V.S. Bond, explore how brands and retailers engage with consumers in-store, online, and everywhere in between. And now, here's Sri and Peter.
Welcome to episode 106, a six-part series Sri and Peter are doing with Bryan Gildenberg, the man, the legend, the hero of the CPG industry, a mentor of mine. I've learned a ton from Bryan over the years on just the evolution of the CPG industry and how to distinguish right and wrong and how to push for the right things in the industry to deliver quality products at value for the consumer and always put the consumer in the center. So our series is called the Omnichannel Shopper 2020, anchored on consumer engagement in the omnichannel world. And this episode, first episode, focuses on the 2020 shopper and their habits. Without further ado, Bryan, please introduce yourself.
Oh, sure. And thank you, Sri, for the way too kind words. And I've probably learned more from you than you've learned from me. Peter, greetings as well. My name is Bryan Gildenberg. I'm currently the SVP of Commerce for the Omnicom Retail Group, a collection of sort of what we call commerce and conversion marketing agencies that specialize in the retail, both physical and digital world. Probably know some of those brands better as the individual operating companies, Tracy Locke, Integer, Haygarth, TMA, and TPN. Prior to that, many of you know that I was the Chief Knowledge Officer, which is the silliest title I ever created for myself, at Kantar, and oversaw the systematic study of retail that Kantar did around the world. So, and have been following e-commerce pretty carefully since, gosh, I don't even know when, probably 2008, I want to say, sometime around there. So, so not too long after Amazon started ramping up.
Thank you so much, Bryan. So we'll jump right into episode 1, again, the Omnichannel Shopper 2020. So as we think about the evolution of the shopper, COVID hit us in March. It's been about 3 months. I think very clearly we can all concur that we are now in a new shopping base. Baselines are never going to look the same again. Some percent of shoppers have been introduced to digital for the first time. First thing that comes to my mind, Bryan, for our audience here is, what are these new shopper expectations? How are they changing? And what expectations particularly have accelerated in this pandemic situation we've had for 3 months?
I think it's a good question. I think if you want to simplify shopper expectations, I think they kind of boil back to that classic business paradigm of faster, better, cheaper, pick two, right? So and I think the biggest shift that the digital world has presented is that the shoppers basically said faster, better, cheaper. I don't want to pick two. I'd like all three, please. And so I think that's been the overarching theme. And I think the COVID process has certainly accelerated that. I think the faster, better, cheaper sequence is probably important as well. It might be better, faster, cheaper, or faster, better, cheaper. But I think people are beginning to understand that the delivery of value in this new world is going to have price anchored somewhere in there, but then a lot of the differentiation and a lot of the win is going to come on the speed and frictionlessness of the experience, as well as the quality of what you get.
So here we are. We've coined the new 3-letter word, FBC. Thank you, Bryan.
There we go. So there we are. So it's sounds like a 90s hip hop act. So
That's great, Bryan. I think the faster, from my recent experience, has been the challenge in this pandemic. I was looking at ordering an item from Amazon for my Chicago address, and I mentioned to you I recently moved to New Haven, Connecticut. If I deliver to Chicago, it's delivered next day. If I say New Haven, Amazon gives me a week out. So still some problems in their supply chain based upon geography. We talked a little bit about expectations. How about habits? What are some prime habits you see have changed during the pandemic, and what are the ramifications of those habits?
This is one where I'll express a point of view which might run counter to other people's points of view. I have two parallel thoughts on this. Number one, I think the idea that anyone has established habits in this era is insane. That just doesn't make any sense at all. everyone's lives are so dislocated at the moment that the notion that any of this is going to become habitual behavior easily and seamlessly just seems to be deeply ungrounded in human behavior. So I think what's legitimately happened is two things. Number one, a lot of habits are in flux. And two, Peter, to the point you were making before, whereas Amazon used to be just a habitual purchase and you knew it would show up tomorrow or next day, a lot of things that used to be habitual and less conscious behavior have been forced into your conscious mind because you've got to actually now make choices about this stuff and really think about it. The only thing that is 100% certain about human beings, and this is all the work of Daniel Kahneman and everybody else that's ever done behavioral economics, nobody wants anything in their conscious mind for any period of time. So I would think right now the best way to look at this is that habits are in flux. And because people are being forced to think through things they didn't have to think through before. So my argument would be here that most of the winning of new habits isn't work that's already been done. It's work that's going to be done once people get new choices. In the end, my old colleague Walker Smith at Kantar has a wonderful way of saying this. He goes, the most important word in the phrase the new normal isn't new, it's normal. What people are trying to do is to build normal out of the variety of suboptimal choices that they have available. And that once the real choices they have come back in a meaningful way, the new choices they've made are really gonna have to fight to hold on to that behavior. I don't think the acceleration of new behaviors is as much of a layup as people think it is.
This is why we have Bryan here for his viewpoints. And as I mentioned earlier, a mentor in the transformation of the industry. So thank you for that brave and courageous statement, Bryan. So the logical very next thing that came to my mind is, we're in stage 3+ in some states. You go down to Texas, you can walk right into any store. Restaurants are back in full operation. Some states are stage 2, and here in New York, stage 1. But we're all looking forward to everything opening just like it used to before, especially stores that people can go walk into and shop. And so we're days away, practically weeks away on the high side. Yep. When that happens, is there a new expectation shoppers are going to have from stores because of the FBC theory that you kind of alluded to earlier?
Yeah, well, I think there's two things. I think some of this will, to Sri, to your excellent point, it's going to vary a lot by region. And I think there's one big implication to that, which we'll get back to. But yeah, clearly look, hygiene is the new whatever. I think is still going to be a very real and true thing. And that either from a consumer satisfaction point of view, just straight up from a liability point of view, I think retail stores are going to have to spend a lot more time cleaning themselves than they have in the past. That's got really interesting implication for a series of downstream choices retailers need to make about how to meet these new shopper expectations. A lot of which in the end are going to be around how many other things can you do apart from knock the basics down. So wow. I think that what you're going to find is that I think retailers are going to be looking at digital and omni-channel tools as a way to bridge the gap between the basics and a better experience. And sometimes those tools will supplement the basics. So, the person who invents an efficient robot that can clean shelves is going to make a fortune. So there also will be a digital experience that helps to bridge the gap for a retailer. If I know that I may not have as many people around to help shoppers because I've got so many of them doing basic in-stock and hygiene work, how do I use, say, my mobile app as a way to provide services that I used to rely on people to provide? So, that's everything from better in-store navigation all the way up to sort of better information and more detail around sort of products and stuff like that. So I think there's a couple of things here, but I think that, yeah, I think at its basic level, I think you're going to find that shoppers are going to expect their mobile technology to do things for them that people used to. So wayfinding on mobile in store is going to have to get much better. Knowing whether something's in stock or not is going to have to get much better. And I think there's a lot of sexy bells and whistly stuff that retailers are going to try. But if they just got wayfinding and in-stocks right on mobile so that you had a 99% correlation between what's on your phone and what's really happening instead of an 85% correlation, that would be a huge step in the right direction.
Bryan, Amazon's still a major threat to these omni-channel retailers. Can you talk a little bit about how you still think they have an ability to beat retailers, even among shoppers that are actually walking the physical aisles of a store looking for product, that Amazon can even capture them at that moment of truth?
Sure. Anytime the retailer creates a moment where trust is broken, Amazon has an opportunity to step in via the phone and close that gap. Amazon may not be loved by everybody, but it is certainly one of the most trusted institutions in America. So you break that trust gap in a variety of ways. You break that trust gap by emphasizing brands that aren't the brands the shopper's most comfortable with in a way that doesn't help them orient. You break the trust by being out of stock. You break the trust by being too expensive. And I think at any time where the shopper goes, okay, this is uncertain to me, how am I going to get certainty? Certainty is on their mobile device. The minute the shopper stops looking at whatever the retailer's trying to do and starts engaging with their mobile phone, of course Amazon has a chance to win that. Amazon's over 55% of mobile commerce in the United States. So if I'm in shopping mode already, the thing the retailer's got to do is to keep the shopper out of their non-captive web, basically. And as I said, I think the easiest way to do that is by retailers just screwing up the proposition, rather than something that Amazon's not going to geo-fence people at Walmart and start beaming them notifications saying, I know you're in the salad dressing aisle at Walmart, buy salad dressing cheaper at Amazon. That's not a really good use of time. But for Amazon as a resource, especially given the role that they're playing as the default search engine, particularly for Prime members, 58% of America, that rely on Amazon as their primary reference point for shopping. If you end up sending somebody back to a reference point, the likelihood that Amazon then converts from there is pretty high. So yeah.
Yeah, I think Amazon has probably the richest set of content for any e-commerce retailer. And if omni-channel retailers aren't able to present that content to help build that trust, to your point, and convert the sale, then people are going to open up their phone, they're going to find it there, and there's a good chance that they're going to actually execute a transaction even while they're walking the aisle of the store. So,
well, and I think too, the problem is that the retailer, that we'll talk about this later in terms of things that Amazon doesn't do well, either with this podcast or another one, but the problem is that the minute you start to get into an item specific conversion decision, the one thing Amazon's really good at is item comparison. So and as a retailer, that's a fight you're going to always find it hard to win vis-a-vis Amazon, no matter how good your omni-channel content is, given the role that Amazon plays for shoppers. So what you want to do, it's like the classic 80s movie War Games, where the computer discovers the only way to win is not to play. The only way to win an item level selection battle with Amazon is to not have the shopper use Amazon as if you're another retailer for that process. So.
Very good. Very good.
Speaking of Amazon, here's the dreaded word that many senior executives cross-category I've had debates and conversations with, which is the famous word private label.
Yeah.
So obviously in this pandemic, when brands are difficult, I've had such a tough time finding Clorox wipes.
Sure.
First time in life, I walked into a Walgreens and I bought the nice wipes, and I found out that the nice wipe towels are actually pretty sturdy and they cost about a third as branded ones. So, the industry has feared private label for quite some time, but private label really hasn't made a big dent in terms of the volume of the business or penetration in categories, other than maybe baby care. Now, is that going to change here because people are for the first time getting exposed to private label in a big way?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think, Sri, you and I have talked about this before. Again, I'm gonna die on this island by myself, but I don't get the Amazon private label thing as much as other people do. The fundamental business problem Amazon is trying to solve is not the gross margin they make on the selling of categories that are a trivial part of their first party business, which is a trivial part of their retail business, which is a trivial part of their commercial enterprise. That's a lot of work to accomplish something that's not really all that important to you. And as a result, I just don't think Amazon's got the same gut level motivation to build a great private label program that other retailers would. I do think in general, you're right. Availability clearly chased people into private label in a number of categories that they hadn't considered it before. And yeah, that's not necessarily a new habit, but that's an experience where you're like, ah, you know what, that worked out all right. So yeah, I think that, so I do think private label can do reasonably well. I think the other thing is it's always important to remember that private label isn't one thing, particularly in America where you've got retailers that build private label, which is just straight up lookalike private label. You know, it looks like the brand and it's cheaper, versus something that's a little bit more designed, but not meant to be a premium positioning. And, you know, Nice at Walgreens is a good example of that, all the way up to something like Organics at Safeway, which is a much more premium proposition. And then kind of the gold standard of US private label, which is Kirkland Signature at Costco. And then you start to get into things in Canada like Loblaw President's Choice, which isn't really a private label. It's a great brand that happens to be owned by Canada's largest retailer. So I think there's a variety of things in there. I think each one of those will have a slightly different role to play. The big one is to keep in mind is that, you know, despite whatever the unemployment number was in America like last month, so 13, 17, whatever. You know, the Fed just released today that they're going to be looking at 9.3% unemployment, which translates to about 16 to 17% underemployment in the U.S. even by the end of the year. You got a lot of people that are economically dislocated. Certain types of economically dislocated shoppers, i.e. people that used to be middle class that are struggling to get by, will convert to private label. And I do think that for brands, one of the big things we see brands needing to do is to reestablish their value proposition vis-a-vis private label specifically, make that really understand what that differentiation is and make it a bigger part of your equity story.
Yeah, and Brian, you know, to reestablish your efficacy and value proposition, that is no joke.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, I can say from my recent experience that that people driving to the digital shelf to do e-commerce, particularly in grocery, the one thing the digital shelf does very well for private label is it provides content, particularly content around trust and authenticity.
Sure.
I worked with a retailer recently to help them build out their ratings and reviews for their private label in the grocery space.
Yeah.
This is pre-pandemic. They saw nearly a 60% increase in their e-commerce private label because now their products had hundreds of reviews, were backed as highly trusted, and consumers were able to see that when they can't see that in a physical store. But which leads me on to my next question.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Brian, what are the aspects of the digital shelf that shoppers are very interested in that make shopping more pleasant than, say, going into a physical store?
Well, I think again, there's always a flip side in terms of experience in e-commerce, which is, you know, and the trade-off is frictionless engagement, right? So, and especially in need-based categories, so much of what the shopper's looking for isn't necessarily bells and whistles, but just easy and fast. That the frictionless nature of content creation, I think, is a big piece. When you start to get into categories where the shopper either has to or wants to now make a decision, then the content you're talking about is incredibly important. And you guys know this better than I do. You know, the most meaningful content you can deliver because of the way in which the human brain processes information is reviews. So you can process a number of reviews at one time. They have very easily visually coded systems that allow for the quick processing of multiple points of perspectives. You can read the ones that you care about. The review algorithms on .com sites just work very well for how people actually make decisions. I think going forward, there is an opportunity for enhanced content, but it's got to be meaningful, right? You know, it just, you know, and there are categories for which that makes sense and categories where it does not. I mean, and the category, I guess the way I would try to think about it is, everybody always thinks about categories as being low engagement or high engagement. I would probably think about the use case as being low engagement or high engagement. You know, so as an example, you know, toilet clog remover, right? Not a high engagement category necessarily, with all due respect to my friends at Liquid Plumber, but the use case might be. So there's probably an opportunity to show people okay, if you're looking for that item, you've got a problem. How do you build supplemental content around that helps that person solve that problem? I think that's probably the way to think about it, which is, where are the use cases going to create something meaningful that somebody would be interested in, rather than how do I get them interested in the brand, which seems to be where a lot of that conversation starts, and where a lot of the suboptimal content clutters the screen. So,
Bryan, speaking to high engagement and low engagement with content, one of the things that I was just thinking through real fast here was, when there's higher engagement categories, will there be a new kind of somewhat of a behavioral shift to online only in certain categories? I know you said previously already to one of the questions that don't expect radical change in behavior because this is forced upon all of us. So we're going to go back to something that may change slightly. But if I think category by category, I think what's clear to me, Bryan, is cleaning products is going to have a much higher penetration online go forward period. Any other category that really comes to mind for you for higher engagement, therefore higher conversion online versus what it used to be?
It's an interesting way to frame the problem. One, I think I was probably got a little over my skis with that I don't think everything's just going to go back to normal, by the way, just so we know. I just think that assuming that the habits that people have now are going to continue, that's the part where I get a little worried. That just doesn't make a ton of sense. I think that what was implicit in your question was a correlation between engagement and the category going online that I don't think is necessarily true. I think a number of shoppers are going to use online as a way to get out of buying low engagement categories. And in essence, when you look at how the massive growth that Costco has seen during COVID, Costco is an exercise in, I like a high engagement shopping experience in which I can buy a huge number of categories I never want to buy. So, because I'm going to buy 137 million days of the product and never worry about it again. And so I think that blend is going to be really, really interesting. So I think there's a segment of shoppers who can afford to pantry load, who are going to find retail not the world's greatest experience, that are going to look to channels like Club and online as a way to pantry load themselves out of a shopping trip. So I think that's going to be a big piece of this. And then from an engagement point of view, look, I mean, there are a bunch of categories that we've all had to buy online in the last 2 or 3 months because the stores were closed. And, this may change the way people buy. I think in particular, it'd be interesting if I had one piece of research I could do on this, it would be to assess people's satisfaction with the seasonal preparation for summer that they had to do online. And do seasons become something I start to do online, perhaps because I know how? One of the big problems that Amazon has always had in seasons is because it's a combination of items that you don't usually buy, so the algorithm can never learn it properly, which is one of the reasons why brick and mortar retailers tend to outperform Amazon seasonally, except at Christmas, obviously. But so I think there's some interesting questions in there around what will drive consumers to move to online and whether that's high engagement or low engagement.
Hey, Bryan, have you seen any indication that consumers have greatly expanded the portfolio of retailers that they're shopping from during the pandemic, or did they were buying in Target, they'd go to Target.com. They're buying in Walmart, they went to Target.com, or they bought in Grocery X and they went to Instacart shopping at Grocery X?
I think a lot of that was just based on, I think a lot of the change in portfolio was based more on availability than conscious choice. And yes, I think you saw more shoppers using resources like Target.com, Kroger.com, and SamsClub.com in particular as solutions to getting consumables. It's really important to remember what a small percentage of the U.S. population use any of those websites. So, I mean, the basis point share gain that those three retailers had in household penetration, I think is less in aggregate than Amazon had an increase in household penetration in the purchase of consumables during COVID. So Amazon's growth rate is lower because they already have 30% of America buying consumables. So Amazon going from 30 to 37 is a 20-something percentage growth rate. Kroger going from 0.4% of America to 1.2 is a 300% increase, and everybody starts talking about it. So Amazon, to some degree, you always have to remember the law of large numbers with them from a penetration perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Bryan, I wanted to go back to the high touch and engagement versus low touch and engagement. One of the things, again, that the industry has been faced with is this whole notion of UGC, or ratings and reviews, and brand trust, authenticity. Peter and I have had 2 exclusive episodes in the past on these podcasts on brand trust and authenticity and ratings and reviews, right? If you go into a low touch world, do ratings and reviews even matter in the first place? And then I see the great retail divide. You got Amazon, which has its own ecosystem of reviews. And then for a majority of the part, most of the retailers, minor exceptions to that with what's coming up in the future here, confidential data, but most retailers tend to just syndicate reviews from brands. So where does the consumer really focus their attention on reviews? Does it matter? And then if it's low touch and that's going to get the higher penetration online, does it even matter in the first place?
Well, I mean, I think you get into an interesting question there around initial purchase versus repeat purchase, right? So, if you're looking at the consumables world, the vast quantity of consumables that are bought every day are bought by someone who's already made a decision that's just looking to fulfill a decision they made weeks, months, or years ago. And they're just looking to continue the execution of that decision. So in that case, the reviews matter? Maybe not as much perhaps as they might in other things. Where reviews matter is 2 things. I think that if you're in a category that even if you've got a high degree of habitual repurchase, if there's a lot of new entry into the category, that's where reviews do matter, because people are going to be put back into conscious decision-making mode from habit by messaging and information. And as a result, you're going to need to be able to fight that battle when the consumer's trying to figure out whether or not they want to do something new. So
really experienced that, Brian, both at Johnson's Baby and at the entire Revlon family of products.
Right.
So competition.
Yes, and yeah, I mean, if you're trying to keep a shopper that's sought after by brands, and that's largely going to be younger shoppers, millennial shoppers, urban shoppers, affluent shoppers, right? If your brand plays in that world and needs those shoppers, I would say that ratings and reviews are incredibly important, because you're going to get comparison shopped a lot. So, it's kind of like it's kind of like if you've ever been in a situation where you've been dating someone that's significantly out, where you're out kicking your coverage, yeah, you got to dress well. I mean, that other person's going to have a wide variety of other options, and you never know when you're going to need to be wearing your best clothes. So, so that would probably be the way to think about that. So yeah, I do think they're important. Yes. Again, it may not be the category here that matters so much. I mean, it might be the shopper. If your shopper is one that is sought after, assume somebody is seeking them. If somebody is seeking them, you've got to be ready to defend.
Yeah, I'll echo what you say, Brian. I know from my current work that particularly if you're launching a new product, a new brand, or restaging a brand, and there are historical buyers, having that trust and authenticity, that content available, will help accelerate the path to purchase. Last question for you. Let's assume this pandemic gets over at some point. Are there particular categories you think the return to the old way of doing things is going to be more prevalent than what people have embraced during the pandemic?
Well, yeah, I think if you're, I think if you're looking at a couple of these, number one, I do think, I think apparel is going to be a wide open question, and that's got enormous implications for the economics of the physical footprints that sell things, in that a disproportionate amount of the profit in the U.S. retail ecosystem is driven by apparel. So, so whether you're a mall or whether you're Target or Walmart, the relationship people have to new clothes, which has been fundamentally changed at this point. How that relationship restarts is going to be fascinating, because that's one where obviously we're not going to keep our COVID habits because we have to go outside again. But at the same time, I think that gets weird in a hurry. I think the categories that, and I think the rest of this, I don't want to say it's obvious, but I think if you're in a category, you just have to look, how fundamentally did the need states for the category change during parts of COVID that aren't going to continue once the world reopens? So, and that's everything as simple, that's everything from home technology to breakfast cereal. So, there's just a bunch of categories that have shifted. And then I think if you're in if you're in any category that's related to, say the office lunchtime experience, like beverages, you're going to have to reintroduce yourself as a habit to consumers that may not be going into the office every day. So may not build habitual behavior. So I may need to really rethink what my relationship looks like to those. So I would say that's a big one. And I think the last one is just travel-based retail. I mean, so many brands make a ton of money selling stuff as a result of travel. And despite what's happening to the airline stocks at the moment, it just doesn't seem real that we're going to get back to a level of the travel that we were at 6 months ago anytime in an 18-month business planning horizon. So I think that's got some open questions as well.
Yeah.
Some days that scares me, Brian. And here we are. We're wrapping up episode 1 here about the omnichannel shopper and the 360 of the shopper and their behavior in 2020 and given the current pandemic. Brian, on behalf of Peter and me, we want to thank you for coming on board and having this lively dialogue with us, as well as share your industry experiences on the omnichannel shopper. We'll be back next week focused on Amazon and its role in omnichannel transformation. And very specifically, is Amazon one of the catalysts for omnichannel transformation? But I do want to give you the key takeaway that Brian gave us here today. And the key takeaway is, if you're dating, dress well. Just kidding, folks. So, but do catch us and follow us at the hashtag below on LinkedIn, hashtag Shri and PVSB, and is AND, Shri and PVSB. You can also catch our link here for all our episodes as a playlist on YouTube. So you can go back and watch episode 1 through 6. And this is number 7. And if you are more of the type that likes to listen to a podcast, you can catch the link right here, which has every single one of our episodes in podcast formats across the platforms that are most beloved, whether it be Apple, Spotify, a total of 10 plus platforms for you to choose. So thank you folks for listening in. Thank you, Brian. And we'll be back with the next episode, Amazon's role in omnichannel transformation, very soon.
Looking forward to it, guys.